Good morning and hi from Higher Level. Thank you for tuning in to our high notes this morning. Today we're going to talk about showing up through your stress, but not just by hiding it and ignoring it, instead of learning how to recognize it. I saw this yesterday. I was homesick and I saw this funny thing on Facebook and it said, February mood. I just want to douse my house in Lysol and set the scale on fire. And honestly, yes, that's how I feel. And I don't care who you are, that's probably how you feel right now too. But spring is on the horizon. So it's kind of ironic that we're talking about recognizing stress triggers today. This weekend and yesterday I was sick, and usually that's not really a stress me out kind of thing, but I feel like for the entire month of February, my daughter and I have been playing tag with viruses like the entire month. She's sick, I'm sick, she's sick, and it's been on loop. So I worked from home yesterday, and I worked from home every time I was sick this month or she was sick. And that's amazing to be able to have the opportunity to do that. So thank you, Higher Level. But yesterday I decided, no, I have to stop. I have to take the day and rest. You have to slow down or you're never going to get well. And it was really, really hard to do that, to just give myself some time to take it easy and slow down. Because right now, some of you guys know Erin Kopek, the Director of Marketing at Higher Level. She's on maternity leave and she'll be back soon. And we also just hired 3 new team members in the marketing and sales team here. So the thought of missing a day because I'm sick just really overwhelmed me. However, I tried to switch up that mindset and remember to even to have the capability to slow down, like a company that allows you to do that when you need to, is worth everything. So today I love this topic and I love the person speaking on this topic. I'm going to introduce her in a moment, but we really need to slow down today and learn to recognize stress triggers and manage our emotions when they seem a little bit unmanageable, and to show up well through all of that. So before we get started, as a quick reminder, today's high notes is worth 1 SHRM professional development credit. So if you have those letters after your name, the ID code to claim that credit will be sent within 24 hours after the completion of the event. And that happens every month. So that's 1 SHRM credit to recertify yourself every year when you need to do that, free through Higher Level every month. That's awesome. You don't have to go to a conference. You don't have to pay for it. It's free. Do it from your office. Now I'm going to kick it off to Kerri Burchill, as she is more equipped to coach you today than I am, based on the story I just told you. So a little bit about Kerri. She is the organizational development leader at SIH, or Southern Illinois Healthcare, which is a multi-facility hospital system and medical group across Southern Illinois. She also owns North Star Coaching, which is her independent consulting company. With over 20 years supporting leaders and implementing structures that drive desired behaviors, Kerri is highly regarded in her work. She holds 2 master's degrees, and a Master of Education in Human Resource Management, and a PhD focused on developing novice professionals. She has also published in a peer review on mentoring and reflexivity. On top of all that, you guys, she has lived in 3 different countries, 6 different cities, and serves 9 organizations. At Higher Level, we call her a mover and a shaker. Right? You're a mover and a shaker.
I don't know that you guys have said that to my face, but that's very fun.
So last year, Kerri started working with Higher Level, our leadership team, on emotional intelligence. And I didn't spend the whole last year with her, but I joined sessions at the end of the year and 1 coaching session so far this year. And she is really challenging us as corporate leaders. And I'm so excited to implement what she brings to the table and see myself grow as a new leader and manager over the coming months. One last thing you need to know is that, the people that come around and you may not see them very much and you may not chat with them very often, but when you do, you just feel better. Well, at Higher Level, that's how we feel when Kerri comes around. She's just a delight. So without further ado, the floor is yours, Kerri.
Well, thank you, Carson, for such a warm invitation. That is just awesome. I'm really excited to start our discussion today on emotional intelligence. and really just want to dive into it after that great intro. So thank you. As you know, we're going to be working on emotional intelligence. Thank you, Higher Level. This is a picture from one of our retreats last year. Really excited to share some insights that we've gained and also talk about your own development in your journey of work. So the platform for my consulting company is that we help you achieve ambitious goals. And, you know, kind of the tough part of that is we'd probably already be achieving some of those really ambitious goals if it was that easy, which necessitates us to kind of grow and develop as leaders. So the work we're going to focus on today is that emotional intelligence, with arguably companies say, you know, beats intelligence all the time. The EQ is really what helps people thrive in leadership roles. So we're going to look at how we recognize triggers, manage reactions, and really show up well the way we want to achieve those ambitious goals. So we're going to talk about 6 tips. First one is knowing who you are, then recognizing our triggers, managing the story in our heads, the importance of having an accountability partner, manage what you can control, and at all costs, be kind to yourself. We're going to have a highly interactive webinar. So on the right side of your screen, you'll notice that there's a chat function. Please be ready because we're going to start off with some interactive questions right from the beginning. So first tip is know who you are. You cannot recognize your triggers, manage your reaction, or show up well if you don't first know who you are. Pretty hard to be authentic and pretty hard to kind of have that self-discipline and self-management. We talk about EQ if we don't know who we are. So let's translate this a little bit. Activity around burgers, believe it or not. Type your answers in the chat room. Who makes these burgers? Yep, this is our first challenge of interaction. Let's make a guess. This really does relate to how we know who we are to manage triggers. Seeing a couple of people starting. Little tip there in the papers underneath one of the burgers. Really? No takers on who makes this burger? Making me hold my breath here, team. Let's go. Who makes these burgers? It's really getting around that idea of know your brand and know who you are. All right, well, I'll help you out with this first one. So this is a Dairy Queen burger. You might recognize it with the bacon, the round, sesame seeds on the left-hand bun there. Let's go to the second set of burgers here. Who makes the square burger with these little buns? I think in American speak, you might call them rolls. I'm from Western Canada and we call them buns. You might hear me drop an A at some point in our webinar together today too. All right, who makes this square burger? I've actually never had one of these burgers. No one's typing in our chat room. There's 19 people on the call so far today. Certainly someone's got a thought. All right, White Castle.
People are using the questions format, so I don't know if you're having difficulty seeing that, but I can see it.
All right, great. Well, maybe you can be our translator then, Carson. Yeah, I'm not seeing these, so thanks everyone as I kind of beg you to participate. I love that you're already participating. Okay, so who's the second set of burgers from, Carson?
Yeah, it looks like everybody's saying White Castle.
White Castle, absolutely. Now, what's interesting about White Castle, I've never had them, but when I've done this activity with other groups, they joke about being in their college days, and apparently this is really great hangover food. Don't know anything about that, but the reputation of White Castle really filling that midnight craving. All right, this one's a tricky one. I actually thought that everybody would know this one. I wonder if anybody in this crowd does.
Don't know.
No, okay, so I thought that this was a US burger. It's from Harvey's, and it turns out that it's a Canadian burger. I just didn't realize that. And it kind of goes under the Subway model of Subway sandwich model, where you can get a burger and then tell them whatever toppings you want on top of that. So some people, if you've ever done a fast food chain in the US. What about this one? This is an easy one.
Yeah, I get about half of that one all the time.
Absolutely, right? So we think of McDonald's, that song that came out in the 60s to all beef patties, special sauce, lettuce, cheese, pickles, onions on a sesame seed bun. Right? How many of you still recognize that song? Probably. And then finally, these two pictures come from the same company. They're made to crave. I know if we already haven't had our breakfast burger this morning, this might make us carve out what we're eating for lunch.
Oh my.
What are you getting there, Carson?
I think my chat is just a little bit delayed, so let's wait a minute.
Okay.
I get the answer just a minute after we start talking about it. Some people did know Hardee's, by the way. I'm surprised.
Really? I am so impressed. That is awesome. It's been a long time since I had the Harveys. In fact, I get it confused with Burger King. I always think that Harveys and Burger King are the same thing.
Yeah, are these ones Burger King?
Nope.
I don't know these burgers.
I purposely didn't leave any hints in this one, like I've left the paper in some of them. 2-syllable company. All right. Go ahead, Carson.
Culver's? Hardee's?
Oh, yeah. Good for you. Wendy.
Wendy's.
Culver's. Yeah, good guesses. All right. So the idea is, instantly you see a burger and different brands come to mind. So what we're really zeroing in on here is know who you are. Like even from the 60s, that McDonald's song resonates in our head for many of us, right? You recognize what a Big Mac looks like, or the square burger from White Castle. So it really gets at what do you stand for and what do you value? These burgers are not trying to be the same thing everywhere, right? Wendy's tries to have the square burger and it's never frozen, right? McDonald's does its flashy thing with the special sauce, White Castle, square, smaller buns. So we really want to think through who you are. We can't manage anything about ourselves if we're not honest to say, our burgers are best at midnight after a party, or I want to go to Harvey's because I can really carve out whatever my toppings are. So let's think about other words that you might use to describe yourself. So right now in the chat box, and I'm going to give you 2 minutes to do this. It's okay that we're going to have a little bit of quiet on the webinar. List 6 words that others would use to describe you. So 6 words that people who know you would use to describe you. And type in those 6 words, and we'll talk about this anonymously, so your name won't be attached to it.
You can use the questions format. It looks like we're having difficulty with the chat box, but the questions is working properly.
Great, and I'll give us 2 minutes to do this. You tell us, Carson, when we have some people brave enough to put up their 6 words.
Yes, it looks like we're getting some in now.
Excellent. I so appreciate a webinar that's interactive. So thanks everyone for making this speedy for us. Fantastic.
Okay, so I'm seeing words like transparent, brave, approachable, caring, kind, hardworking, connector, witty, loyal, knowledgeable, integrity,
Good.
creative, dependable, funny, crazy,
Good. And hope as you're,
supportive, motherly.
yeah, as we're hearing Carson read out those words, and thanks very much, Carson, for just tag teaming with me. You're imagining someone who's crazy. Like, what does that look like? I bet they're fun to hang around with. Or someone who's transparent. What does that honesty look like? Connector. What sort of behaviors are we seeing with that person? So we really want to be clear on how we want to show up. And then when we have fallouts where maybe we're in a grumpy mood and we're just not able to let loose and kind of have fun and be crazy, or when we're a little intimidated by a situation, we may not be entirely transparent, or maybe it's a new social dynamic and that connector piece that we really think we're known by, it's just a little edgy to get into. So we want to think through, who are we? And then how do we show up? Really not a lot different than the burger exercise, right? So Wendy's burgers, you're going to get the same thing from that burger joint consistently, or McDonald's or whatever. And you have to work to get clear on what does that look like. So even though we're going to continue on here, I want you to simmer in the back of your head around, how do I show up? How consistent is that? So, you know, looking at other Wordles, it's just a nice visual to look at here. You know, would more people say that you're honest? Would more people talk about your integrity or creative, dynamic? It's a curious exercise to go through and ask people, like, tell me 3 words that you think describe me. What is that? What comes to mind for them? Here's one. We talk about achiever, being ambitious, being a leader, communicator. So I'm sending out a challenge activity. This is not something we're going to spend time doing right now, but putting it out there for you. Look online for personal values list. This is another layer of really identifying who you are. Choose 10 off of that list. They'll list 50 or 100. Give yourself some time to think through that 10, narrow it down to 5, and then land on your top 3. And start doing some self-reflection around, how consistently am I living these top 3 values? So other people are going to see you one way, and also you also want to come across that way. So it's sort of a double layer way to confirm knowing who you are. So here, I want to think through about knowing who we are. Sometimes we fit the environment we're in, which is great. And sometimes we try so hard to fit in an environment that maybe we conform or we lose track of who we are. So in part, today's webinar might be a chance for us to just pause together and say, wherever I'm working, whatever degree I'm on, what education I have, does that fit who I am when we pause and think about what we stand for, and people who know us and how they identify who we are. So it's definitely healthy to step back and think about that. I was coaching someone who's in his 50s this morning, and he was saying, I don't know what the magic recipe is here, but in the last year or so, I feel like I'm finally letting myself be just who I want to be. I'm kind of don't care if they're happy with how I'm deciding things or the decisions I'm making. And you could see this small group of business people in the community really nodding their head, like they've all had some sort of shift where maybe early on in one's career, it's pretty common to sort of try to be a mold. And then we sort of get to a point where at all costs, know who you are and be loyal to that person. So reflection today, you know, how much are we fitting the mold of wherever we've landed? And how much is that us just being us? And it's lucky that it happens to fit where I work too. So know who you are. That's tip number 1. So here's a little story about my discovery of fit. As I mentioned earlier, I'm from Western Canada, and I was fast-tracked in the early 2000s. I was assistant principal of this school, GP Vanier, And I was the youngest assistant principal in the second largest school board of Canada. And my partner and I decided, gosh, we're really both being fast-tracked different careers. I don't know if I want to be this comfortable forever. You know, we were kind of hitting the ceiling early on in our careers. So you can see here I'm from the western part of Canada above Montana. That I ended up applying for a teaching job in the Netherlands, working on a NATO base. How cool would that be? My partner thought it would be awesome to be like the Velo pizza delivery guy going around Brussels and delivering pizza. He ended up applying for med school, and we just sort of said, hey, let's toss both of those irons in the fire and see what happens. Well, as it turns out, I did not get the NATO job. He did get into med school. And so that brought us down to Dominica, which is south of Guadeloupe, you know, crazy little developing country in the Caribbean. Very fun and totally different. So I found myself in this radically different environment. This is just a picture I pulled out of my photos preparing this webinar. Volcanic island, totally different from Western Canada. I can guarantee you there'd be no snow there. And I left this booming city and kind of moved into this really nature-based island, totally different. And what I found myself thinking is, gosh, in my drive to, you know, be a successful administrator in a school and second largest board of Canada, I had been so intent on sort of fitting what they wanted that I didn't realize I was sort of becoming their mold. Now, parts of their mold fit my personality, and parts of it, I'd kind of maybe lost a little bit of some of who I was. So I found myself quite symbolically looking out this new terrain, radically different experience. And it was a chance to kind of pause and go, like, who am I and how am I managing that? So I ended up getting a principalship job at a private school on the medical school campus. And arguably, when I look back at those couple of years, there are definitely some leadership things I did not do well, in part because I wasn't really clear on who I was. Yes, I'd done administrative jobs before, but they were prescriptive. I was fitting in their mold of what they wanted a leader to be. Now I'm principal of a school in the Caribbean with very little mold attached to it. And I thrived in some aspects of that and stumbled too. You can see me here fitting in with locals. I just won a dominoes game on the front porch of a neighbor in a village that we got to know. You can see I'm the only female, very much like me, fitting in my own mold, kind of cracking through some of those social stereotypes there. So it brings us back to know who you are. And in part, that's why I've started my own company consulting, just really want to thrive in this work and help people understand who they are and how they show up at work. So my 6 words to come full circle on tip number 1 is that I believe in progress, not perfection. I'm all about helping each one of you on the webinar today move forward in whatever that looks like for you, wherever you are, just nudging forward. I'm relational, I believe in people, and I am ambitious. I want to achieve those goals. So first tip, know who we are. Now this is in part because we, after we know who we are, can then have a better sense of where we belong. And when we find ourselves in a spot where we belong, then we thrive. So here's some insights about the sense of belonging. Brené Brown's just a brilliant social scientist, and she says we're hardwired for connection. It's what gives purpose and meaning to our lives. In the absence of love, belonging, and connection, it just leads to suffering. So we really want to think through, where do we fit? Where do we belong? Because that's when our talents are going to come out as best they can. So typical human interactions kind of have this competing circles thing, right? You talk about cliques at work. Sometimes you feel like you're accepted, sometimes you're not. Sometimes you're invited to go out for lunch with people. Sometimes they forgot that you even work there. So what are these competing things, and how do we manage our reactions to these natural human dynamics? So we can feel sometimes like we're triggered when we don't belong. So just understanding where you fit and knowing that in a world that's full of human beings, we're not going to fit 100% of the time. That would be luxury. So we are going to have things that trigger us. We are going to have sort of that button pushing around where we fit and where maybe we're not belonging. So that brings us to this great omega eggs picture. when we feel those pieces where we're maybe not fitting, someone's trying to get us to do something we're not comfortable with, we're not able to just show up and be ourselves, just know that that's a trigger. Just know that that's a trigger. And sometimes really strong feeling of fit can help us be happy, sad, angry, surprised, disgusted, whatever it is. We need to recognize then when we're triggered. So Psychology Today has this list of possible triggers, right? Maybe it's a feeling of being understood. Maybe it's a sense of being valued, being right, feeling comfortable in a setting. All of these things, when they're not there, or maybe too much there, can feel like a trigger. So, high level example. Maybe someone really feels accepted by you, and they gesture that by giving you a fat bear hug, and you are not a hugger. So even though they're gesturing acceptance, which is a great thing, the hug may be a trigger for you. You're just, get out of my face. Thank you, but. So think through these scenarios. So here's another chance for a chat room input. So trigger analysis. Your boss tells you that you have to work longer than you anticipated. You've already made plans to do something after work. What could be your reaction? What's a trigger for you? Let's type that in the chat room. And by trigger, I mean that reaction that just kind of pops up. You didn't really manage it, not manage it, you just have a natural response or a trigger. Give you a second to show us your insight. I know these are the big thinking questions. How's it looking there, Carson?
Just got a couple so far. Let's give them some time. I think for me, it would be along the lines of like, you don't want to cancel on someone, some guilt, some irritation.
I hadn't thought of it for sure. We have a couple of those that we're going to go through, so read them out.
Okay, annoyed, resentment because of work-life balance, fear of missing out, aggravated because I have to rearrange my schedule.
Yeah, what's this boss person doing, man?
Yeah.
Okay. Good. Okay.
Getting defensive, upset.
Yeah, I think this nonverbal picture really shows it all, right? Like stop it, just go away. I'm annoyed, I'm angry, I'm feeling guilty to the friend that I'm bailing on, I resent being asked again. All right, scenario number 2. You say something in a meeting and no one acknowledges your great idea. It's like you never said anything. Carson, might you have a little bit? Right, what's your reaction? They don't even acknowledge that you contributed to the conversation. What do you do?
This is a tough one.
Yeah, getting a little closer to home. I have to admit, I was debriefing a conversation the other day with the leader where I contributed to a meeting, and I just didn't get the buy-in that I thought I'd get. And so I was asking for feedback, and the leader said, you just wouldn't let it go, Kerri. And I said, you're right. When I don't feel heard, I repeat what I'm saying. And it was good. I, in that moment, thought, yeah, I was triggered, and I didn't manage it as well as I could have.
Mm-hmm. All right. Insulted, undervalued, left out.
Yes.
Reflection. Maybe my idea really did suck, or I didn't present well to the audience.
Okay, good. That last one's an interesting one because it's getting at some of that, like I have a trigger, and then moving on to some of our next tips. How do we manage that, right? So the point here is you're going to naturally have a reaction. That's okay. You're going to have a trigger. It happens. So, we could shut down like the person in this picture, just discouraged, or we could choose to manage it. Okay. So tip number 3 is manage the story in your head. So what are other reasons why your boss might ask you to work late? Type in some answers.
Mhm.
Carson has the insight. I hear her going, It's a little bit harder on this one, right? Because now we're switching from my natural reaction, which is totally fine to have a reaction. It's fine to be triggered, to then starting to manage it. So the first step in managing is, what's that story in my head? And I've got to slow that story down and help myself be a little more objective to think, what are other possible reasons why my boss might ask me? So what are you seeing there, Carson?
Yes, some people are saying maybe there's deadlines have to be met, or they know that I will do good work.
Yep. Yes, exactly. So, it
There was
switches from this first
uncontrollable
picture.
that came up.
Yeah. Switching from the first person of, just don't talk to me. I can't believe you're asking me to work late, to, gosh, maybe there's something I can do to help. Maybe there's a deadline that I didn't know about. Maybe I feel respected. I have value, needed. I'm making a difference. I have unique skills that nobody else can do. That's why I'm asked to work late. Totally different than our reaction to our boss around feeling angry, resentful, right? Now we're starting to manage that story in our head. And of course, it could be that our boss is just picking on us and making us do all the heavy lifting. That's a possible story. And then that we manage that differently, right? It changes my behavior in response to that. So scenario number 2, somebody's ignored you in the office, right? So what are other possible reasons why your colleagues maybe didn't acknowledge what you said?
I do think while we're waiting on other answers, sometimes if I ignored something someone else said, I'm still processing it from the beginning.
Right. There's a perfect story of managing something in your head, right? Absolutely. We've thought and really marinated on something that comes out in this really clear, articulated bombshell, and it may take people a second to process. Yeah, Carson.
Others are saying, yeah, they didn't hear me.
Right. And maybe they didn't, right? So in my case of the meeting last week where I was asking for feedback because nobody sort of bought into what I was saying, I didn't say it very well. Yeah.
There's a bigger issue being discussed at the time.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And maybe it's not that, hey, people are ignoring me and they don't care about what I'm thinking, right? This poor person in the picture with their head down, I mean, that's just discouraged looking. When in fact, your idea was too smart. Maybe people didn't hear you. Maybe the group didn't understand what you meant. There's some reasons to kind of manage that story, which then changes how we choose to react to that trigger coming out of us. All right, I'm just gonna do the 2 scenarios and move on. So having a story in your head is a natural reaction. So we're not trying to necessarily change our interaction with the world. We're trying to change our reaction to those feelings. So managing the story in your head really shows your own emotional intelligence. So one thing that is noteworthy is when we talk about managing triggers, one of our natural inclinations to trigger is to blame. So you think of that boss who wanted you to work late. Our initial response is often blaming the boss. How come me? You're making it so I'm missing the event tonight. Situation with people in a conference room. You didn't listen to me. You weren't paying attention. You don't respect we're blaming. And there's this great video by Brené Brown that I really want to show you about blame. So as we walk through this video together, it's 2-3 minutes long, I think. Think through how this shows up for you and how you've seen blame in action. Good? Okay, I'm going to play it here.
How many of you are blamers? How many of you, when something goes wrong, the first thing you want to know is whose fault it is? Hi, my name is Brene. I'm a blamer. Let me just tell you this quick story. So this is a couple of years ago when I first realized the magnitude to which I blame. I'm in my house. I'm on white slacks and a pink sweater set, and I'm drinking a cup of coffee in my kitchen. It's a full cup of coffee. I drop it on the tile floor. It goes into a million pieces, splashes up all over me. And a millisecond after it hit the floor, right out of my mouth is this: damn you, Steve. My husband. Because let me tell you how fast this works for me. So Steve plays water polo with a group of friends. And the night before, he went to go play water polo. And I said, hey, make sure you come back at 10, because you know, you can never fall asleep until you're home. And he got back up at 10:30. And so I went to bed a little bit later than I thought. Ergo, my second cup of coffee that I probably would not be having had he come home when we discussed. Therefore, and so the rest of the story is I'm cleaning up the kitchen. Steve calls, caller ID. I'm like, hey. He's like, hey, what's going on, babe? What's going on? So I'll tell you exactly what's going on. I'm cleaning up the coffee that spilled all like dial tone. He knows. How many of you go to that place when something bad happens, the first thing you want to know is whose fault is it? I'd rather be my fault than no one's fault. Because why? Why? Because it gives us some semblance of control. But here, if you enjoy blaming, this is where you should stick your fingers in your ear and do the no thing, because I'm getting ready to ruin it for you. Because here's what we know from the research. Blame is simply the discharging of discomfort and pain. It has an inverse relationship with accountability. Accountability, by definition, is a vulnerable process. It means me calling you and saying, hey, my feelings are really hurt about this, and talking, not blaming. Blaming is simply a way that we discharge anger. People who blame a lot seldom have the tenacity and grit to actually hold people accountable, because we would spend all of our energy raging for 15 seconds and figuring out whose fault something is. And blaming is very corrosive in relationships, and it's one of the reasons we miss our opportunities for empathy. Because when something happens and we're hearing a story, we're not really listening. We're in the place where I was, making the connections as quickly as we can about whose fault something was.
Okay. Let me jump back to our PowerPoint here. So you get the key idea here that with triggers, one of our reactions is often to blame. And blaming really gets at not managing our triggers. One is the opposite of really that emotional intelligence that we want to see. And it really is counterintuitive to thinking objectively around managing that story of how we show up. So let's think about this in another way. So our triggers often throw us in this spiral, right? We get a story going in our head and it just spins and spins and often gets bigger and bigger. And so, some stories in our head might be influenced by work, family, time crunch, pressures, change, all of these competing things going at us, including bad coffee. And it can kind of impede our ability to self-manage or really get a hold of those triggers. So when we get pushed and pulled and thrown in a million directions, it's hard to self-manage and avoid our triggers. So that brings us to tip number 4, which is reach out for help. So I love this picture of the spiral, and sometimes other people can help us sort of touch bottom and spring forward out of that spiral and really moving forward. It's exceptionally difficult to pull out of the spiral alone, and that's why tip number 4 is really reaching out for help. So this is kind of what happens when we don't reach out for help. We have an issue and we jump into a fix, right? We're just caught in that vortex. Family demands are coming on, I better come in early to work so I can leave early for family. Maybe another issue is people didn't hear me, I'm just gonna talk louder next time, fix. And we keep doing this issue fix, and we don't really get at progress. So of course, if we just are issue fix, the risks are burnout, overwhelm, unhappiness, fatigue, it goes on. So typical fix issues, right? You go to use the copier and it's jammed. The person before you that jammed it never unjammed it. Oh, we've all experienced this. Well, you might swear, bang the copier doors loudly, try to find the paper. Eventually you unjam the copier and make your copies. Issue fix. right? Didn't pull out of the spiral on that one. Another one, you have tons of work to do. Stressed, you're grumpy. People are trying to be like, hey, Kerri, how's your weekend? Yeah, good, thanks. Yeah. You go and you just put your head down and you try to do the work. Maybe you can go in earlier for a couple of weeks. Issue fix. What's really causing that work? Another issue, people at work keep eating your food in the refrigerator. This is a phenomenon that just really intrigues me. So you mutter to yourself when your pop is half empty. You might talk to other people about how dumb drinking someone else's pop is. Maybe you even buy a mini fridge in your office. Issue fix. Doesn't really move us forward. I'm going to see if we can get the video going here too. Okay. So what we really want is this progressive progress idea, right? We have an issue and we turn to other people for help and they help pull us out. Now, of course, it's life. Another issue is going to pop up and we're going to reach out for help and we're going to find solutions that really bring us forward. So we see this progress of moving forward. So let's think about these issues differently. You go to use the copier and it's jammed. The person before you never fixed it. Possible solutions. This is again that self-management idea. Maybe you suggest training at the next staff meeting. Maybe you find out who it was and respectfully ask if you can work together to unjam it. Create an unjamming the copier cheat sheet. And there's a bunch of things that I could manage my reaction. Or you could do this alternative about Evan. You could find out who jammed the copier and really stuff them in the copier. So you have tons of work to do. Your brain has too many tabs open. Of course, you can go and work earlier and burn yourself out. Maybe you say no to something or lots of things. Clarify the priorities with your boss, ask for help, do the quick items so you feel like you're digging out of the hole. These are examples of how you manage, and by reaching out with someone to kind of help you pull out of that spiral, you can get a little more strategic. People at work keep eating your food in the refrigerator. You let it go. You might feel good about sharing. Maybe someone needed it. Maybe there was like a diabetic issue that they really needed a sugar fixed. Discuss norms with your team, like, hey, this doesn't feel respectful. What's going on? See if the budget can afford free pop for the office. Stop bringing your pop to work. Like there's a bunch of strategies versus just spiraling and just being really angry about people doing this ridiculous thing of eating people's food in the fridge. I'm still confused by it. Tip number 5 talks about get an accountability partner. So we talked in tip number 4 about reaching out for help. This is accountability. So here's a good friend of mine, Tanya. We started teaching together back 25 years ago. And, you know, we text each other. She lives in Canada still, around like, hey, I need to pull me out of this hole, pull me out of this spiral. I need an accountability partner. Crazy as it sounds, these are examples of things in my life. This is my perfect puppy bug. I've got to be home by 5 o'clock. That's a 10-hour workday, long enough for the dog being alone. And she's my accountability partner, right? I've got a reason to do that. This is my partner, Keith. He has a friend. They go out fishing every now and again, not very often because he's caught in the spiral like everybody else. And what he does, it's the accountability partner. Leave work. Let's do this. Let's get out early. Let's have some fun, whatever the accountability partnership looks like. So what's interesting is measuring this accountability work. So here are some examples of what I've done with other companies. So here's someone who was doing the emotional intelligence work of stopping sugarcoating things. And this is we do these research displays of actual data that people can demonstrate how they emotionally intelligently grew. So here's an example of, you see the sugar bowls at the bottom. She talked about the quantity of sugar coating she did, and over time, as she self-managed, had an accountability partner, reached out for help, she saw that she could deliver the content a little more clearly and truly. Here's another one where someone was just flat out wanting to understand emotional triggers. And so she spent a lot of time reflecting and reporting out with a group of colleagues in our Leadership Academy around, I'm trying to figure out what are my triggers. Forget managing them. I just need to figure out what they are. Another example of building trust through collaboration. So there's lots to look at here. Let's look on the right-hand side of these bars, right? So you can see this person was tracking how many times her colleagues are reaching out for that collaboration, an indication of the trust, self-management. right? So we're kind of bringing those first 5 things together and having an accountability partner or measurement. Here's another example of someone really trying to figure out, you know, how are they growing? What are they doing? In this one, it's interesting to look at the top left, the goal. They started with learning to let go and delegate. And then it really, if I was honest with myself, became more about getting out of my comfort zone and feeling more comfortable public speaking. So, you know, when we try to know who we are and then identify our triggers, manage them, reach out for help, get accountability partners, it's a long process. You know, it's not an overnight thing, but boy, this is the stuff that companies value when we talk about growing leaders and really seeing who we are. So in different companies, I've led these leadership academy groups where people come together and they show how they've grown, how their emotional intelligence has shifted over the course of a year working together. So that leads us to the next tip, which is managing what we can control. I love this GE slide because where do you think we spend most of our energy? Yeah, not a hard guess, right? Things that are out of our control. It's really hard to stay in this turquoise box of things in our control, right? So we have a copier that keeps jamming. I have a lot of ways that I can control my reaction to that. Can I control the fool who jammed the copier and then walked away? No. Do I spend a lot of time maybe bad-mouthing that in colleague, swearing at the copier, banging the doors and huffing? That's all stuff out of my control. What a bunch of emotional waste, okay? So it can drain us. You know, we got to manage what we can control. So going back, Carson talked about the chance I've had to live in a few different cities. This is, I love a block in Baltimore. Obviously not a great neighborhood. We lived in a tough part of the neighborhood when we lived there. And I think this is so telling because you can see it's boarded up buildings. Squatting's an issue, drug use, all the typical inner city stuff that you can imagine. And the community members said, hey, what do we control out of this? We can't control fixing the apartments. We can't control getting more money for our community so we have, you know, really reliable neighbors. What we can control is boarding them up, and instead of making it look like just a crap hole, we can paint them. And it, you know, when I first moved there and all my transition of getting used to a new neighborhood, it took me a while to realize, hey, those are not real windows. Yeah, manage what you can control. This is a great indication of a neighborhood saying we can't control a lot of stuff about what we wish our world looked like, but we can at least make this apartment building look like it was intentional and it's not as much of an eyesore as it would be if it wasn't boarded up and we let people break in the windows, and you know, we didn't even bother painting the fake windows on here and the cool peace signs and stuff. I mean, it's just a much different looking environment. So back to scenario number 1, your boss tells you have to work longer. What can you control? Well, you know, this is where you manage yourself. You might call your friend, rebook. You might say no to your boss. You might come in earlier tomorrow instead of working late tonight. Maybe you daydream about how you're going to use that overtime money, right? We can choose to manage. The stuff that's in our control ultimately is us. Scenario 2, right? Feeling ignored. Well, what you might control, your poker face. Maybe you capture your smart idea so it's not lost when they're ready to hear your brilliance. Write down your feelings where no one can see them. Get it out so that your face doesn't show the RBF. Talk to people one-on-one about how that didn't feel great. Ask for feedback around, hey, they made a comment, how come that didn't land well? So things will change. That's just life. We have to adapt, that's a guarantee. This is a fun book that I thought I'd recommend. It's really about finding the rhythm in the chaos. Yes to the mess. It's surprising leadership lessons from jazz. So basically, when you improvise and you're part of a jazz quartet, a group, you know, 10 people, whatever it is, there's always notes missed. There's changes. Somebody has to take the lead and move the musicians into a different kind of music. And the leadership roles change. It's very fluid jazz music. And so they have some nice analogies. If you're a reader, you might like that. I pictured this here. This is my grandmother on the left side. She turned 100 last August. And Henry, her boyfriend, he passed away a couple of years ago. But Henry had 3 wives and they all passed away on him. And when we were leaving out of the Caribbean and all these changes that we had through med school, Henry lived in a bunch of different places, and of course he'd had a lot of change. I mean, 3 wives that naturally died, and don't get any stories around what that might be. I asked Henry, you know, where do you think we live? Where are we going to find a fit? And his advice is something that I keep with me. If you're open, you'll see it. You know, so where are those things that you can control? If you're open, you'll see them. And the final tip today is this couch that I saw at a coffee shop in Canada last time I was home. You are beautiful. So be kind to yourself. You know, we're not going to be honest around who we are and forgive ourselves for those times that we don't manage things well if we're not just first kind to ourselves, because you are beautiful. So what does being kind look like? Give yourself permission to say no. Reward yourself. I've got a leader that I coach, and she's crazy frustrated, super bright, sees where things are broken, you know, is in a dynamic leadership position, and she'll be in meetings and sees what should happen and has to stop herself. Like, she knows the group's not ready to go there yet. And so she actually writes down questions that she wishes she could ask the group to push them forward, to get them to like light bulb on, why aren't we moving forward? But she doesn't. She controls what she can control. And when she gets to a certain number of times when she had the self-management, the emotional intelligence to stop herself from dominating the conversation and steamrolling people, when she shows that enough time, she buys herself a dress. I know it sounds silly, right? This high potential or high performing, high powerful leader, her self-management comes with a reward. Pace yourself through the tough stuff. You know when there's a big project coming, you know when there's a tough week of reporting out or whatever the dynamic is. Pace yourself and allow yourself to feel whatever you feel. You know, we're going to have triggers and reactions. Acting on them is a whole other thing. So managing triggers is really about this cool idea of building neural pathways. So we can actually rewire our brain. I'm saying it really simply, but it's a great concept. So when we have self-management, so some of those poster boards that we looked at a few slides ago of people saying, I want to work on this emotional intelligent characteristic, I want to show up differently, I'm going to measure it. So what did that force people to do? Well, they had to unlearn some of their previous ways of thinking and doing it. Use self-discipline. They had to be honest. When are they letting themselves be triggered? And you have to hold yourself accountable to you. So showing up better and really building these neural pathways is enhanced and more effective when you measure your growth, you talk to someone about changes in your behavior, celebrating them, showing up well. Gosh, I was really pleased that this went down like that. Did you see they actually bought into whatever I said? You know, it's too easy to focus on the negative stuff. Where is that self-discipline to manage what you can control? Sometimes people find it really powerful to journal, just slowing down and writing about stuff. And of course, the impetus behind everything we're talking about today is reflecting. So ultimately, how do you show up well? Well, these are the 6 tips we talked about today. Know who you are, recognize your triggers, manage the story in your head, have an accountability partner, control what you can control, and sometimes that is an itty bitty box, and of course, be kind to yourself. So you may find these other sources helpful. This emotional intelligence book, when you buy a brand new version, it has a card in the back with a survey code, and so you can take a real simple survey that just helps with some insights around how you show up and where your emotional intelligence strengths may be and maybe where they're not. And what's cool about this book, I think it's like 10 or 15 bucks, is it gives you 2 surveys. So you can do one now and then work on some stuff and then do it again and see your growth, which is just cool. And this fun book, Verbal Judo, somebody, a military leader, who just really learned how to word things and phrase things so that others would buy in, which really talks about that self-management. It's not just blurting out whatever you want. It's self-managing to slow down. How am I reacting with other people? What am I doing to show up differently? I've had some leaders really enjoy the Verbal Judo book too. So on that note, I'm going to pause here for questions. And keep in mind as you're typing them, Carson will read them out. If there's anything that I could be of service to you, my email is there. Feel free to reach out and contact me, just colleague to colleague. Or certainly if there's some support I could offer your company, or you think that maybe there's some way that I could help you achieve your ambitious goals, I want to be that for you. So on that note, I'm going to pause, and Carson, you let me know if people have questions that we can dialogue about. And I'm going to sip my tea.
Thank you so much, Kerri. And guys, the book Emotional Intelligence 2.0, 1.0, that's the book that Kerri followed with Higher Level last year for leadership training. And again, I didn't participate in that last year, but I listened in on a few of them, and it's some powerful stuff. So even just getting that book and sharing it with your organization or taking it in as a leader yourself would really challenge you as a leader and a manager to grow your team and drive your team to the results that you'd like to see. A couple questions that I'll address so far that we had throughout. I will be sending the activity ID for the SURE and professional development credit out after the webinar. It will be tomorrow, along with the recording of today's presentation. And then Kerri's contact information is here on this last slide, but that will also go out alongside the recording too. So you will have the chance to be able to reach out to her directly if you don't capture this information today, or if you lose it in the meantime. Does anyone have any other questions?
Well, I definitely want to thank everyone for interacting and being a part of our webinar. Everything from burgers to your 6 words. I really want to help you achieve your ambitious goals, and that's a part of pulling out of the spiral. So let's make sense of this craziness together.
The name of this webinar unofficially was, I'll have to look it up.
Let me go back to the first slide.
Emotional intelligence, managing, yeah, go back to the first slide. Let's get the official.
I'm getting there. Emotional intelligence in the workplace.
Perfect. Everyone is saying thank you, Kerri. It was a great webinar. Thank you. Appreciate your time.
Awesome.
All right. Well, if no one has any questions, anything else, we will go ahead and wrap it up. Thank you so much for hanging out with us this morning and being interactive. It was so interesting to get to hear everyone's answers, and everyone was being so honest and just forthright. So that's what makes this better. And I hope that you'll join us next month. In March, we will be talking about retention in today's recruitment market. It is so difficult to find talent these days, as I'm sure many of you know. And if you can find them, it's hard to keep them. So that's what we'll be talking about. And our owner, Teresa Kachubig, will be joining us for that conversation. So you'll get an invite your way in a couple weeks. And I hope you'll join us for March High Notes.
Awesome. Take care, everybody. Happy Tuesday.
Thank you, Kerri.
Bye-bye.
Bye.